No matter how sympathetic you are toward the poor, there is a moment when life in slums still makes you recoil. That reaction exists even today. Now imagine going back to the 19th century. The shock would not be emotional, it would be physical. Air heavy with rot, streets that function as open toilets, homes where filth never dries, only accumulates. And the most disturbing part is this.
I am not describing a failed or distant country. These conditions existed in London itself, side by side with wealth, industry, and modern ambition.
So, what was hidden from us? What did progress choose not to show? Today, with the help of AI Reconstruction, we are going back into the filthiest corners of Victorian London to understand why living now is not normal. It is a privilege, one you can't breathe here. First, I'll take you to the narrow courts of St. Giles Rookery, an area 19th century reformers explicitly targeted because its streets trapped air and disease.
Parliamentary reports in the 1830s argued that cutting new roads through St. Giles would allow fresh air to circulate and reduce illness. The premise was simple and brutal. Here, air did not move. And when air does not move, sickness settles.
Step inside one of those courts, and the body understands instantly. The passage is barely wider than an outstretched arm. Buildings rise on both sides tall enough to block the sun before it reaches the ground. The light never lands. It hovers somewhere above, leaving the floor in permanent shade. Moisture clings to the walls, beading on brick like sweat. Each breath feels thick, slightly sweet, already used. Move east toward the converging alleys around Seven Dials, and the compression intensifies. Streets fold into one another, creating pockets where air stalls. Windows are open, but nothing changes. The smell does not escape. It layers. Damp fabric, old food, human waste smoke. Not one smell, but many stacked and fermenting. You inhale slowly because breathing too deeply feels wrong. Underfoot, the ground never fully dries. Mud holds its shape because it is mixed with more than rain. Footprints linger. Each step pulls slightly, as if the street wants to keep you. Water trickles along shallow channels at the edge of the court, carrying refuse from doorways to nowhere in particular. When it rains, the entire surface loosens and slides. Overcrowding turns the space into a shared lung. In a single house, several families occupy rooms meant for one. Doors open directly into bodies. Bedding stays damp because there is no airflow to dry it. Coughs pass through thin walls and return amplified. Opening a window brings in the same air that was just exhaled next door. This is still London.
Walk far enough and you reach the lit streets of the West End London, where traffic moves freely and buildings breathe. The contrast is not distance, but design. Here, in St. Giles and the courts nearby, space itself has been engineered into an enemy.
Nothing about this is temporary. This is not a bad night or a moment of neglect. This is daily breathing repeated until the body learns to accept air that never refreshes. Two houses that actively kill you. The air you struggled to breathe outside does not improve once you step indoors. In 19th century London, officials understood this clearly. Housing inspectors did not blame disease on bad luck or bad habits. They blamed the buildings themselves. Repeated reports warned that certain dwellings trapped damp heat and human breath, turning shelter into a health hazard. Cellars were still legally rented. Back rooms were still occupied. The conclusion was blunt. Some houses did not merely fail to protect life, they shortened it. Step inside one of these buildings near George Yard, and the logic becomes physical. The staircase is narrow and steep, worn smooth by constant use. Rooms are stacked one above another with no opposing windows, no route for air to pass through. Heat rises from below and stays there. Breath accumulates. By morning, the walls feel wet to the touch, as if they have absorbed the night itself. Further north, in areas like Old Nickel density, becomes a design feature. Houses are pressed so tightly together that windows open onto brick only a few feet away. Light enters briefly, then disappears. The rooms never reset. Bedding laid out at night is folded away in the morning while still damp. The smell lingers because nothing dries long enough to release it. South of the river, along streets off Kent Street, near the borough cellar, rooms sit below ground level. Rainwater seeps through brickwork and collects at the edges of the floor. Wood swells and softens underfoot. Mattresses absorb moisture night after night. Several people share the same bed in shifts, their body heat warming the room, their sweat feeding the damp. Beds are reused before they cool. Windows exist, but they lie. Open them, and the air outside is already heavy, already used. Sometimes it drifts in from the next building, carrying the same breath, the same smell. Ventilation exists on paper, not in practice. The house pretends to breathe. It does not. This is still London.
Walk far enough, and you reach streets where buildings stand apart, where air moves freely, where damp evaporates. Here, it cannot. Everything produced inside these rooms, breath, heat, moisture, has nowhere to go. It soaks into walls, into floors, into lungs.
By nightfall, the house is no longer a shelter. It is a closed system repeating the damage day after day. 3. The ground is a toilet. In 19th century London, there was no unified system to remove human waste from the poorest districts. Household slops, night soil, and refuse were emptied, where space allowed into gutters, shallow pits, or open ditches, then left to move on their own. Drainage existed in fragments. Disposal depended on the weather. What could not be carried away was simply absorbed by the street. At ground level, the failure becomes visible. In courts near Bermondsey, the surface never fully sets. Mud holds its shape because it is mixed with more than rain. Footprints remain long after the person has passed, slowly filling with dark liquid. Shallow channels cut themselves along the edges of walls, guiding whatever seeps out of doorways toward the next low point. The street is not dirty in patches. It is uniformly soft. People adjust their bodies to it. Those with shoes walk carefully, placing each step flat to avoid splash. Leather soles darken quickly, stitching loosens and damp creeps upward. Hemlines drag through the surface and wick moisture into fabric. By the time they reach home, they carry the street with them. There is no gesture of surprise, only habit. In narrow alleys off Whitechapel, many walk barefoot. The ground is cold even in warmer months. Skin stays wet. Cuts never close. Feet swell, crack, and itch. Some scratch as they move, dragging toes along the surface for relief. Others tiptoe, trying to find firmer ground that does not exist. Infection is visible in the way they favor one foot, then the other, accepting pain as part of balance. Rain changes everything without cleaning anything. It loosens what has settled and sets it in motion. Waste lifts, spreads, and thins, flowing toward doorways and down cellar steps. On dry days, the surface hardens slightly, but nothing leaves. The smell dulls, then returns when disturbed. Children step into it without hesitation, treating it as ground, because it is the only ground they know. In parts of Holborn, door thresholds are worn smooth, not by feet alone, but by repeated contact with liquid passing through. Buckets are emptied. Water is thrown out. Refuse slides back in. No one stops to look down. Disgust fades faster than danger. The street does not hide waste. It stores it, redistributes it, and presses it back into the body with every step. And once the ground becomes part of daily movement, illness no longer needs to arrive. It is already underfoot, waiting to be carried inside. 4. Hunger that makes you sick. Once the ground becomes a place where waste settles and moves, it does not stop at the feet. In 19th century London, food for the poor was gathered, prepared, and eaten inside that same contaminated loop. There was no reliable system to prevent spoiled goods from being sold or scavenged in the lowest districts. What could be obtained cheaply was consumed regardless of condition. Hunger did not wait for cleanliness. By the end of the day, markets around Spitalfields emptied their stalls. What remained was soft, bruised, and already turning. Vegetables collapsed into wet piles. Meat darkened at the edges. Flies gathered first, their low hum settling over the food before hands did. People arrived after closing, lifting pieces, smelling them closely, faces tightening as rot announced itself. Some turned away. Most did not. There was nowhere else to go. Fish sold late near Billingsgate carried a sharper warning. Flesh broke apart under fingers no longer firm, leaving slick residue on the skin. The smell hit before the taste. Mouths tightened. Breaths shortened. Then the fish was wrapped anyway. Protein mattered more than comfort. Nausea was something to manage, not a reason to refuse. Inside, cramped rooms off the alleys of Holborn food was stored where people slept. Bread sat against damp walls and grew soft before it hardened. Cooked scraps were left overnight because there was no other place to put them. Flies returned, crawling over surfaces, pausing at the mouth and eyes of anyone who dozed nearby. The smell soaked into fabric, into bedding, into skin. Eating itself was a quiet endurance. Meals were slow. Chewing paused as the taste caught up with the smell. Faces distorted briefly, then settled. Water or weak beer was swallowed to force the food down. Alcohol often came first, dulling the senses before the first bite. It was safer to drink than to hesitate.
This was not hunger as emptiness. It was hunger as nausea that never fully passed. Stomachs stayed unsettled. Strength faded without spectacle.
Children's bellies swelled while their limbs thinned. Adults tired quickly, hands shaking before the day was done. What went into the mouth was never just food. It carried the room with it, the damp, the insects, the residue of the street. Eating became a transfer, not a relief. Whatever strength remained was spent processing what should never have been swallowed. Disease circulates.
Once spoiled food becomes routine, illness no longer needs a dramatic entrance.
In 19th century London, sickness followed patterns rather than outbreaks, repeating in the same streets and rooms until weakness felt ordinary. Doctors learned to read disease by where it lingered, not by when it appeared. Care focused on keeping people upright because whatever caused the illness remained untouched. In courts around Whitechapel, the cough comes first. It is wet and persistent, breaking sentences in half. Bodies lean forward to finish a thought, then straighten and continue. Notice how no one turns to look. A cough here is not a warning. It is part of the soundscape. Fever follows a similar rhythm in Bethnal Green. Faces shine slightly even in cold air. Heat rises in the afternoon, recedes by night, then returns days later. People work through it until strength drops without ceremony. When standing becomes possible again, work resumes. Recovery is measured in function, not health. The stomach carries its own ledger in parts of Lambeth. Diarrhea is discussed plainly. Lips crack, tongues, dry hands tremble when lifting tools. Water is still drawn from the same sources, used the same way, because there is no visible signal telling people to stop. Look at how routine overrides caution. Beds do most of the remaining work. Mattresses are shared in shifts, folded, while still warm, never dried. Sweat and residue settle into fabric and stay. When one body rises, another takes its place. The illness remains. Remember this: beds keep what bodies leave behind. People try small defenses. Camphor is inhaled to ease tight chests. Vinegar is pressed to the nose. Gin is swallowed to warm the throat, and still a cough for an hour. Laudanum dulls pain and panic together. None of this cures anything. It creates brief windows long enough to sleep, long enough to stand. Those who cannot manage even that fade quietly. There is no visit, no relief. A door stays closed longer than usual. Rent goes unpaid. A bed opens up. Children fail faster, their margins thinner. Adults respond by lowering expectations rather than raising alarm.
This is how sickness endures here, not as crisis, but as circulation. People do not wait to be healed. They wait to feel just well enough to continue. And when illness becomes routine, death does not interrupt life. It simply shortens it.
6 children fail first. In 19th century London, the same conditions that adults learned to endure pressed far harder on smaller bodies. This was not neglect or indifference. It was arithmetic.
Children carried less reserve into rooms that demanded more from them.
In districts like Bethnal Green, the change is first visible in movement. Children who once drifted through courtyards slow down. They stop running. They sit against walls longer than necessary, knees, drawn up heads leaning into brick for support. Hands lose strength. Objects are dropped, not thrown. Quiet replaces restlessness without announcement. The body gives signals early but softly. Breath shortens after small effort. Skin cools faster and stays that way. During bouts of stomach illness, weight falls quickly and does not return. Adults can miss meals and recover days later. Children cannot. They dehydrate sooner. They tire faster. What returns for an adult as weakness settles into a child as collapse. In parts of Lambeth, infants fail almost invisibly. Crying thins, then stops. Feeding becomes irregular. Sleep stretches longer, but offers no restoration. There is no sudden turn. Only a gradual quieting that leaves less to respond to. Adults adjust rather than panic. Work continues. Someone else takes over small tasks. Extra clothing is added at night. Children are kept closer for warmth. Weak broth is offered first to the smallest mouths. These measures slow decline. They do not reverse it. In these rooms, attention follows usefulness, because usefulness keeps the household functioning. Around older courts near St. Giles, absence becomes the final indicator. A child stops appearing in doorways. A place on the floor remains empty longer than usual. There is no gathering, no interruption. Bedding is folded, then reused. Space is reassigned quietly, because space cannot remain idle. Death arrives without ceremony. No doctor comes. No record is made at the moment it happens. Neighbors learn later when routine adjusts, and one less portion is prepared. Grief does not vanish, but it compresses, pushed aside by necessity. This is how loss concentrates here. Not through cruelty, but through limits. Small bodies reach them first. 7. When nothing shocks you anymore. Feeling does not disappear here. It is reduced to what can be afforded. In London's slum districts, people learn quickly that reacting to everything costs strength they do not have. Survival favors a narrower range of response, trimmed to movement and task. Along the dockside streets near Wapping, labor runs through pain without ceremony. A man stumbles on the slick stones and stays down longer than expected. Others alter their steps and pass. Someone swears under their breath. No one gathers. The rhythm of work boots carts shouted orders closes over the gap. Pain matters only when it blocks the path. In courts branching off Ratcliffe Highway, sound is constant, but urgency is rare. Children cry. Adults argue. A hoarse moan leaks from behind a door. The air is heavy and damp, resistant to travel. Noise presses down instead of carrying outward. Complaints lose shape before they reach a listener. What cannot be acted on is quietly swallowed. Faces flatten. Eye contact shortens. Conversations end earlier than they used to, not from hostility, but efficiency. Help appears only when it demands no rearrangement of effort. Doors close a little faster. Silence becomes the default because silence costs the least. In alleys around Clerkenwell, disputes stop without witnesses. Voices rise, then cut off. Curiosity has been trained out. Looking invites involvement. Involvement invites expense. People learn where not to stand when not to ask how to pass, without registering what lies to the side. Grief is present, but it stays contained. A woman bends over a body and rocks slightly, sound caught in her chest. The air absorbs it. The moment does not spread. Nearby, someone eats. Someone sleeps. Someone leaves for work. Loss is held small enough to be carried. Children learn this pattern early. They notice when calling out brings nothing back. They stop calling. Waiting replaces asking. Quiet becomes instruction, not submission. Nothing here is connected by sympathy. Proximity does the linking. The neighborhood continues to function thinner, more efficient, stripped of excess response. Trade happens. Work resumes. Doors open and close on time.
Emotion is not gone. It is set aside when it interferes. The body keeps moving because movement keeps life intact. The mind follows, narrowing to what the day requires and nothing more.
8. What the city chose not to see. Silence makes places easier to overlook. When a neighborhood stops reacting, it also stops being noticed. In 19th century London, this was not enforced by force or decree. It happened through distance. Areas that no longer demanded attention quietly fell outside the city's field of concern. Only a short walk separates the courts of St. Giles from streets where paving is even and lamps are regularly lit. The change is abrupt. Drainage improves block by block. Sound thins out. Air moves again. The city does not announce this transition. It simply turns its focus elsewhere. Official concern exists, but mostly on paper. Reports are written. Boundaries are drawn. Conditions are described from a remove. Decisions are made without entering the narrowest courts, without stepping into rooms where walls still sweat. Reform speaks about these places without going into them. Distance becomes a substitute for engagement. People inside the Rookeries feel this shift indirectly. Visits are infrequent. Inspections are delayed. Authority appears briefly, then withdraws. Control is not imposed here, it is bypassed. What remains is a pocket of the city that functions without expectation of intervention. In districts like Old Nickel, residents become numbers long before anything changes on the ground. Deaths are counted in tallies. Illness is averaged. Individual stories flatten into categories that travel easily through offices but never return as presence. Loss becomes legible only in aggregate. When removal finally comes, it does not arrive as rescue. Streets are cleared. Buildings are taken down. The problem of visibility is solved. People are displaced, not restored. The city replaces one map with another and calls the process improvement. What disappears first is not suffering, but evidence of it. Minutes away, commerce continues in the City of London. Goods move. Capital circulates. The machinery of progress runs smoothly because friction has been relocated, not eliminated. Comfort depends on what can be kept out of sight. This is the final mechanism. The Rookeries were not destroyed because they shocked the city. They endured because they did not. Progress did not erase these lives. It built around them, learned how not to look, and moved forward, carrying the benefit of distance.
What you've just seen was not an exception or a temporary failure. It was a system that functioned exactly as designed, absorbing suffering quietly while progress moved around it. It lacked attention. Distance made neglect easy, and silence made it last.
If this reconstruction changed how you see modern cities, or made you reconsider what progress really means, let me know in the comments. Your perspective matters more than agreement. If you want more reconstructions like this, grounded in real history, not comfort, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.